Namaste, Dr. Chapple. So this is one of our last series for this segment on Jain meditations. I have learned so much about this, so many questions, as I'm sure many of our viewers have. So someone who is viewing you might be fascinated to say, where can I go visit the temple? How can I go learn more about Jain meditation? Where can I come learn with you? The myriad of questions for the variety of viewers that we have. What can you say to each of them?
You know, it was so fortuitous that when I set my heart on learning about Jainism in 1980, the field was so new. There had really only ever been, even in process, one modern doctoral dissertation on Jainism in the United States. And I met up with Pavanab Jaini, who had just published a book called The Jain Path of Purification. And I said, this draws me. I want to know more. And at that point, there were a handful of people that had begun in earnest to undertake this, including the immigrant community. And recall that immigration opened only in 1965 for people of Asian or African or East Asian origin. And with those early folks came professionals from the Jain community, and they gathered together first in Boston, and they bought an old Baptist church that I met some years down the road. And then in Southern California, they built and convened a gathering in the late 1980s. And I was welcomed in by those really pioneers of the Indian American Jain community. And I'm thinking particularly of Manibhai Mehta, who almost single-handedly raised the funds to buy a small tract of land in Buena Park, California, not too far from Disneyland. And then they went to the city hall and said, we're from India and we like our religion, and they were required to build in accord with Spanish mission architecture. And the first time I drove up, it looked like a dentist office, but it did have Jain Bhavan on the side in Devanagari. And I was so delighted, this was so many years ago, to be invited and return. And from those two humble beginnings, an old Baptist church in Boston and this center in Buena Park, California, there are now more than 62 Jain temples all over the country. And what I invite anyone to do is to just Google, wherever they live, Jain temple, the name of your city. And I've been to the opening of many of them, including the one outside of Detroit, the one outside of Chicago, and the restoration. So what happens is that they're there for a while, and then they decide, oh, we gotta up the scale here. So there's this one in Queens, in New York City, that has an utterly magnificent, bejeweled recreation of the teaching given by the Tirthankara, and it's called the Samovarana. And there's this tradition that whenever the Tirthankara gains that wisdom, they will sit on top of a mandala and beings from all over the universe will assemble, and they build replicas of this and Jain temples as they mature. But find the schedule and simply go for arati. Just go and sit. Don't put your feet toward the image, and be respectful of time of month and all of that. Take your shoes off, but you don't need to cover your head. And just let the mood settle in. And what I love to do with my students is I take them to the rebuilt temple in Buena Park. They bought up the whole block, and then they tore down the old temple, And one of the great stories of Howard Hughes, who was a very colorful local character here, is that he had learned of a sandalwood temple that was gracing the World's Fair Exposition in St. Louis back around the turn of the last century. And he had erected it, he bought it part by part, erected it for his casino in Las Vegas. And my dear friends in Las Vegas, Bhagwan Singh and his wife, Jaina, arranged for that to be purchased by the Jain community. And the Jain community held it for years until they had been able to completely reconfigure their block-long property to build a brand new total India sandstone carved temple with mandap and all of the banners and the temple itself, even more so, gathering space, classrooms, and in the centerpiece, this remarkable sandalwood representation of all things India. And I bring my students and I tell them a little bit, but I just let them absorb what we say in India, absorb the bhav. We go in and we watch the arati and we get invited in. The Jains are very hospitable and we let the lamp and they have a cantor, okay, as with many or most Jain temples, they actually hire Brahmins to be the ritualists. And there's a Brahmin ritualist on site with a beautiful voice. And then every other Sunday. So I'll tell another little story about how to find out about it and why. Every couple of years, there's a Jain convention. And the first one happened in Southern California before I got connected in. And then a major one happened at Stanford University in 1991. And then another one happened a couple of years later in Chicago, Schaumburg, and we gathered in a hotel. And the leadership, Praveen K. Shah, Manibhai Mehta, Sulek Jain, we gathered, many of them physicians, we gathered and they asked, we're a minority culture. What can we do? And I said to them, you hold two things in common with Jews, three things. One, jewelry made by the Jews. Two, medicine widely practiced by the Jews. And three, minority status. Find out from them how they have managed to thrive and survive in so many different cultures. And I told them about our family friends, and we have many, many Jewish friends and have raised our children alongside one another. And my son had been, by that time, to 17 different bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs when he was 13, such that he could recite the liturgy, major parts of it, in Hebrew. So I said, do you know how those kids learn what it means to be Jewish? Is that they go to Hebrew school from the age of 7 to the age of 13 once a week. They learn Hebrew, they learn their Torah portion, they build toward a ceremony, a coming of age ceremony, and they aren't going to forget that experience. And Jews are pretty good at human development. They know after 13, they want to be doing their own thing, but set them up. So what happened is that Praveen K. Shah in North Carolina put together an educational resource that is now being replicated in India. And at the Jain centers, 62 of them all over the country, as many as in Southern California, 2 Sundays a month, about 500 children and young people gather. And they fill every nook and cranny of the property. And they learn a little bit of Hindi and maybe a little bit of Gujarati, more likely. And they study with one another. They learn not only about why people were vegetarian, but they learn about why people, according to the Jain position, really should be vegetarian today. And they form a band, a bond, a feeling of solidarity with one another, so that if they're at school and people ask them, da 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 da, they say, well, did you know? And they speak from a place of knowledge, and they speak from a place of being culturally informed. And this remarkable endeavor with children, in that meeting back in Chicago in the early 1990s, I also said, and you're in a culture with very little understanding. And what the Jews have done all through the United States of America is sponsor academic study of Judaism, not only at centers such as Brandeis University, known to be Jewish, established by Holocaust survivors and refugees. They've established at the state universities, at the religious universities, University of Chicago Divinity School, Harvard Divinity School. The list is so long. They've established professorships to encourage the ongoing study of Jewish faith and the ongoing presence of knowledge about Judaism for the general university population. And bless them, they remembered that. And I've worked closely with Jain nuns, Samanis, junior nuns, based at Jain Vishwavarati, where I had spent time in 1989 and various return visits, taking darshan from Acharya Tulsi, an interlocutor with Gandhi about the promulgation of nonviolence, and with Acharya Mahaprajna, the generator of Prekshadyan, and with their current head of sect, Mahashraman. And these Jain nuns were quite empowered to think about ways in order to let the world know about Jainism. And we invited them to Los Angeles. They stayed with the local Jain family in the neighborhood here. And they studied with me for a whole summer and saw how we structure education in the United States of America. It's very different from India, very different from Europe, very different from Australia. And what we emphasize from the pragmatist philosophy of John Dewey, informed by the spiritual and philosophical and psychological insights of William James, we emphasize the development of the whole person, physical education, emotional education, intellectual education. We require all of our students to study the humanities and the sciences and the social sciences. And this is very different. And what the nuns quickly caught on to in their summer at Loyola Marymount University was really the gift to young people that this style of education brings. And by this time, my own position had become, what should I say, endowed. And they asked me, how did you approach the university? And I told them that we took an existing position and we use this as a way to ensure that the teachings of India will continue forevermore at Loyola Marymount University. And they had set up an organization in Florida, one in New Jersey, one in Texas for Prekshadyan. And with their presence already in Florida, they went to the administration of Florida International University, a longtime colleague, now retired, of myself, and they created the first Jain Studies chair in America. And it worked. It allowed them to teach one course a semester as nuns, allowed the professor, the Bhagwan Mahavir professor of Jain Studies, to receive support for conferences, to receive support for his scholarship. And this then became the beginning of now endowed professorships at a dozen universities, including Loyola Marymount University. And this is a remarkable way for young people to learn something so historical, so ancient, much as old as Judaism itself, and to learn about the ongoing relevance of tradition in terms of forming and shaping modern life, responding to modern problems. So in short, young people, temples, universities.
Perfect. I'm going to pause for a moment